All right, and we are currently recording. Okay, Tyler, I'm done now.
All right. So I think we should have plenty of time for some questions, and hopefully there are some. I want to point out that I know at least Jennifer Hopwood from the Xerces Society was planning on being here. I think she is in here now. So if you have any bee-specific questions, it'd be, this is a great time to ask them, because we actually have some experts here, or any kind of invertebrate specific questions too. So, and hopefully they're not cringing at any of my BIDs that I have in here that may or may not be accurate. So what I wanted to talk about today is making Bellevue a Bee City USA. So we're going to talk a little bit about what the goal of the program is, and why we want to join the program, and why we think the goals of the program are good goals to have. And a lot of the goals of the program we've been doing already in Bellevue, and I say we really loosely as people who've been doing this long before I started getting involved. So if you've been working on environmental efforts in Bellevue, you probably are aware that we've been moving in the right direction on a lot of these things for a while. So we're not starting from scratch on any of these. So really the goal of Bee City USA is to kind of get kind of a community galvanized around support for native pollinators. And the idea is creating more native habitat to support those pollinators, and more expanses of it, diverse species, reducing the pesticide usage, and then kind of getting a little bit of that infrastructure support around those things you're doing from this national organization. I want to point out that the key here is native pollinators. And so when you think of bees, you may think of honeybees, because those are the ones that are most maybe commercially available. They're in logos all over the place, and really they're under all the hashtag Save the Bees. So people are all about their honeybees. But if you're only thinking about honeybees, you're really missing out on all of the beautiful diversity of our native bee species. And there's 7 families of native bee species. So the Apidae, which is the biggest, which includes the honeybees and the bumblebees, Megachelidae, Halictidae, Adrenidae, Colididae, and then these last 2, which I don't know anything about. So if you have any specific questions of these things, ask the bee people. This is just a little example of some of the diversity of the bee species. You can see that bees range from large bees like a bumblebee or a carpenter bee, all the way down to the tiniest sweat bees. And in the United States, most of these are solitary bees. They're not honeybees like you would think of in these big hives that are territorial of their hives. They're living off by themselves as little peaceful hermits. So there's really no problem with honeybees per se. The Xerces Society is relatively neutral to them, but they really are more of a product of agriculture and not a product of ecology. So they're nice because you can put their hives in these little bins and transport them to where you want them to go pollinate things. If you need to go to an orchard, you can take a bin of bees and transport them over to that orchard, and you can drop them off and then let the bees out, and they can pollinate for that season. And you can move them around. And honeybees don't, they can go all year round as long as it's warm enough. They've got a pretty long season. So you can move them across to, as long as the temperature is right, into different agricultural situations and keep them pollinating. And for some crops, honeybees, like this is a honeybee right here, are really important pollinators, at least in our current agricultural system. That doesn't mean that they have to be, because there's plenty of native bees that will do that job just as well. And we wouldn't have that that whole system of having to move and ship bees around the country. And I like the analogy that I was presented here, in that beekeeping is to conservation of invertebrates and bees as keeping chickens is to protecting our songbirds. So there's nothing really wrong with keeping chickens, right? It's a way to maybe keep eggs, or have some food from chickens and stuff. But keeping chickens is really not an ecological act. You're not preserving a species, right? It's kind of the same thing when it's honeybees. You could be using these for some crop value or to make honey or something like that. But this is a European bee. It's not a native bee, and it really is not part of the native fauna. So preserving it isn't really doing something to preserve biodiversity. But we do have plenty of beautiful native bees in the United States. I want to emphasize a few of these just from around the area. This is a Longhorn Bee. It's on some Black-eyed Susan. This just so happens to be a Black-eyed Susan that had some developmental problems. Normally you should have one axis on them, but this one has several here on this flower. But this bee doesn't mind, and you can see that it's completely coated in pollen here. And you can see it's completely coated in pollen that looks like the pollen from this plant, because this bee in particular, and I watch it go from Rudbeckia hirta to Rudbeckia hirta, Black-eyed Susan, same plant over and over and over again. And this is why bees are such good pollinators, because they really like to go to the same species of flower repeatedly. Because of that, they can pick up the pollen from this flower and take it to the same species, but a different individual. Sorry, my mouse is doing funny things. They can take it to the same species, but a different individual. Whereas if you take a pollinator like a butterfly, butterflies aren't as particular about the flower that they visit. And so they may not be as prone to visiting the same species of flower over and over again. They might go to one flower here, get some nectar, and then go to a completely different species of flower next. In doing that, they might transfer pollen from one species to a different species, and that's not viable. So you can't pollinate one species with another. But because bees are going to that same species repeatedly, and you can see this by this collection of pollen, they're really good at pollinating those species. This is a leafcutter bee. This is in that family Megachelidae. If you see those little kind of circular cutouts often on the leaves of your bushes. Oftentimes these are ornamental bushes, maybe like a rose bush or even exotic bushes. They make these little cutouts and they take those leaves and they make like a little sleeping bag out of it, and that's how they nest. And they're called megacheles, which means like big jaws, because they use those big jaws for cutting that out of the leaf. And here, this leafcutter bee is getting some nectar from one of our native milkweed species, Asclepias tuberosa, butterfly milkweed, which is a very wonderful native milkweed species that a lot of people are unaware of. This orange milkweed, people think of the common milkweed with those kind of light pink blossoms. I just think this is just adorable. All of these longhorn bees having a little bit of a slumber party on some liatris. And so they do this, and this is in the morning. Before it warms up too much, they're all clamped on with their jaws, and they all kind of sleep huddled up together. And they're very friendly. So my daughter likes to go out and pet the bees early in the morning before they get all warmed up and flying away. And they don't mind. They're all happy with it. We have this perception of bees being these angry, stinging creatures. And really, I mean, the honeybees are some of the more aggressive ones because they're protecting their hive. And then a lot of that perception that we have comes from wasps and not bees. And really, even most wasps aren't even that aggressive. It's just a couple species, and most of those are the non-native species. Trying to keep up with the chat, and it's prize questions. We'll get those in a second here. here's a little, which I think is a Seratina bee. These are very tiny. This is, I mean, about the size of the lead portion of a pencil, maybe a little bit bigger, with this kind of metallic shine on it. And then I think this is our common bumblebee, but I won't pretend like I'm gonna ID this down to a species, but yeah. Another on, this is some goldenrod. I like this because, as a friend, ex-student of mine pointed out, this bee looks like it's wearing Ugg boots, which I think is a fun little explanation here. So again, all of these hairs are what make bees such good pollinators, because you can see here, all of these little yellow dots are pollen. And these are actually pollen from this goldenrod flower. And I think this is a sunflower bee, which it's a specialist on flowers in the Asteraceae family. So that would be goldenrod and the sunflowers, and the asters. And a couple others. And what I wanted to point out here is that all of these bees, all of these diverse bees, were observed in Omaha and Lincoln, in the city. These weren't observed in some massive wildlife preserve. All of these things, if you're just looking closely, you can see these as long as you're somewhere where there is enough native habitat to support these bees. So you could be going on these safaris for these really interesting creatures in your own backyard, in your own public parks. And that's part of what Bee City is about, is really creating this cool atmosphere, this cool habitat right amongst us. So of course, Bee City USA is about bees. And so in the United States, there's about 3,600 species of native bee. And Bee City is based out of Oregon, where there's probably 600, 800 native species in that state. And in the city of Portland, 80 to 100. And in a single garden out there, 20 to 30. This is, of course, if you have that sufficient habitat that's supporting those. Otherwise, if you don't, you're probably going to see the non-native honeybee and maybe a couple species of generalist species, like a couple bumblebees and maybe a couple of the generalist sweat bees. I was trying to find some good numbers on this for our area, and I don't have them. I looked for a little bit and I can't find much. Aside from the total number of bee species in Nebraska is probably a little bit less than in Oregon. Maybe we're sitting around 400 or 500 total species. This is from the Nebraska Bumblebee Atlas, where people, it's a citizen science survey of bumblebee species in our state. And we have, in this, there's been 10 species of bumblebee identified through this citizen science. So you catch them, you basically chill the bees so you can get a good look at them, and then you can get a picture if you can. There's some guidance for how to identify them, and you submit all of this, and you can submit your pictures. And then it's contributing to quite a bit of data for the distribution throughout the state of the bumblebees and also the species we have. Of course, bees may be the best pollinators, but they're not the only pollinators. But thankfully for us, if you're supporting a bee in your habitat, you're also supporting all of the other native insects as well. So everyone likes butterflies. Since we were children, we've always been enchanted with them. Poetry for 1,000 years has been written about butterflies. So you probably don't need much convincing that they're worthwhile. Moths are also important pollinators. And I would say this group right here, butterflies and moths, because of the fact that they have such nice chewy larvae, are a very important food source for a lot of things higher up the food chain. Those are called caterpillars, if you remember your Eric Carl. Beetles can be pollinators. This is a beetle from out in the sandhills, and you see its head has pollen all over it. This is on a prickly poppy out in the sandhills of our state. And flies can be pollinators as well. This is a syrphid fly on some Tradescantia, some spiderwort. Well, why should we care about pollinators? Probably if you're here, I would imagine you already know a little bit about why we should care about pollinators, but maybe you're wanting to know why we should care, and that's why you're here, which is great too. For one, the vast majority of all flowering plants require a pollinator to reproduce. So if you like flowers, you have to like pollinators, because those plants just simply wouldn't exist if there weren't for pollinators to keep the pollen going, to pollinate the new species, for them to make new seeds, and for them to reproduce. And in fact, many of these are specialized interactions. Maybe not as tightly specialized here as in some areas that have been more stable over a long period of time. We had the glaciation, so this area is really only a few thousand years old as it is right here, but we have some specialized interactions, and some of these groups are specific to a group of flowers or maybe a species of flower. And those are species of flowers that have been here for a long time throughout the revolutionary history. And so they've come to rely on those specific ones, and they emerge from hibernation when that flower blooms, and they have specialized anatomy to get pollen and nectar from those flowers. And so there's some tight relationships there. If the pollinator goes extinct, so will the flower. If the flower goes extinct, so will the pollinator. We all, even if we don't care about these cool little bees I showed pictures of, we all do eat, and a good proportion of our food requires pollination. And we really have not come up with an alternative to solve this problem of little robotic bees flying around or something like that, although there's certainly efforts to do this, which to me is, I am a scientist, but I do find it a little bit sad that we would rather come up with a technological alternative to something that already exists than to preserve the things that we have. And that's coming from someone who does enjoy an interesting invention. And of course, there's an economic value to this, depending on your perspective and who you're trying to convince. That economic part might be the most powerful of all of this, that bees, as they can fly from one flower to the next and transfer that pollen, are a lot better than that, than if we take some little manual tool and walk from flower to flower and take some pollen and try to add it and pollinate. And humans are a lot more costly and slow at that. And as I was mentioning before with the other pollinators, if we support pollinators, we support other insects. And so just by creating an habitat that supports bees and prevents them from dying off, as in reducing pesticide use, we're also supporting all of these other cool insects. I was excited that as a non-entomologist, this is not my field, but we actually recorded the first recorded sighting of this particular beetle in Sarpy County was in our backyard. So this Hiphopsis lemniscata, which is, I think, a beautiful beetle. And we are now in the records of this beetle. I contacted the beetle people at UNL because it wasn't on any of the records I looked up in any of the papers. So we did get it confirmed. We can get beneficial insects like these lady beetles that can come in and chomp and eat the goo all of these aphids. So every year we get a little bit of a outbreak of these oleander aphids, but they don't last very long because things come and eat them. So it's just kind of contributing to the ecosystem. And of course, who doesn't like monarch butterflies, right? This is like the symbol of insect ecology in this country. And you can even see some of these little oleander aphids that are just hanging on for dear life. And in the next few days, they're just going to go tanking because shortly after this picture is taken, this is when we get the lady beetle larvae coming out and the birds picking these off too. So, and then look at this gorgeous wasp. So all of these wonderful wasps that are lovely and peaceful, they're not these, they're mostly solitary wasps. They're not these colonial wasps that you picture, attacking, the bears in Yellowstone National Park or something like that. These are just lovely little wasps that are controlling pest species. And really, I always like to emphasize this in my classes, that insects are great because they can turn sunlight into whatever your favorite animal is. Because we animals, if you remember from your middle school science classes, we don't photosynthesize, but plants do. And what that means is they're taking carbon dioxide out of the air and they're making a sugar out of it, which is really quite remarkable. And we have not found out how to do this in an efficient enough manner as to do it as a food source as humans. With all of our knowledge of chemistry, we can't just get this going in this self-reactive thing without using plants. So plants are able to make these sugars with just pulling carbon dioxide out of the air. And the things that are most efficiently eating those plants are insects. And so as insects eat those plants, they take that sugar, that glucose, and they put it into something that's easier to eat. So it might be a caterpillar, it might be a beetle. It's something that's eating these plants. And now birds and amphibians and reptiles and anything that's eating these insects is now getting that sunlight. They're getting that food that came from that sunlight. And as it moves up the food chain, it all started with the things that were eating those plants, which is largely insects. And then all of the wonderful things that enrich our lives. So the longing for when everything starts turning green here again and flowers start popping out. Those flowers exist because they're attracting pollinators. Believe it or not, these flowers do not exist to entertain us. So these are part of the ecosystem, and these flowers only exist because they're part of an ecosystem and they evolved to attract the pollinators that are coming there. And frankly, they could care less whether we think that they're beautiful. And it's just a happenstance that we do. All the berries and the fruits that we're picking throughout the year, if you go down to Nebraska City or something to the apple orchards, if you enjoy pumpkins around Halloween, there's squash bees are very good pollinators of the members of the pumpkins and squash. And then the pies on Thanksgiving. I think this is a good photo from Molly, who actually runs the Bee City organization, of just a wonderful assemblage of foods that are all the result of pollinators. And then again, if I'm hoping to appeal to the most hardened cynics here too, who could care less about bees and wasps and butterflies and only are caring about aesthetics and money. And we're saving money by saving bees, and we're bringing aesthetics by saving bees. I think bee habitat is more beautiful than the alternative. This is Bellevue University campus. And this is the meadow, and this is just a year old. So it's only going to get better in the years to come. And these are kind of things that we could be having be part of our city parks, and really to a smaller scale and more designed areas and gardens and medians, which is just much better than most of the alternatives. And you've probably seen reports of this, and if you haven't, there's been tremendous data now showing that pollinators are declining. So a lot of this work has been going on in North America in particular, but really all across the world. And so we could be losing more than a quarter of our bumblebees. 40% of all pollinator species are in decline. This is an example of one that is becoming more rare, the rusty patch bumblebee. And that's not just the case for bees, it's the case for all insects. And given that insects are this integral part of that food web that's taking the plant material and bringing it up the chain, this is a problem for life as we know it. So we have a very complex system with the more nodes that are connecting, the more stable it is. And ecosystems are kind of like that Jenga tower. So the more things you start pulling out of it, the more likely that tower is to fall over. And it's not that one piece that is pulled out and lost is going to cause that tower to fall over, unless it's a really important one. And so what we're doing is we're just seeing these little pieces be lost systematically and reduced in number until our tower is really wobbly. And why is this the case? So two big reasons are habitat loss and pesticide use. So taking out all of the native habitat in an area and developing it into apartments or houses. And then the areas in between houses and apartments, often look a lot like this, where it's these big expanses of, mulch or maybe turf grass or, barren areas. And the areas that are filled with plants, their pesticides are being overused. And so when I say pesticides, I mean things that are intended to kill what we would call pest species, which are largely insects. So those things that are eating plants and then moving food up the food chain, when we're killing those plants, we're killing that baseline. And so now we're losing the things that are moving stuff up the food chain. We're removing those nodes, we're taking out those Jenga pieces. I like thinking of the map of the United States in terms of a night map. So what does the United States look like at night? So you can see that we are losing these big expanses of land. I think sometimes we have in our mind that, well, my yard or this public park or something isn't really going to make a difference because there's Yellowstone National Park out there, or we have these ideas of the Wild West and these open areas. But if you look, we're really losing these open areas, and cities are growing greatly. So if we want wildlife and if we want the services that come from insects and animals and plants, which are required services, including filtering the air, making it breathable, filtering the water so it's not polluting the water that we drink, preventing floods, all of these things that require the interplay between plants and animals. If we want those to sustain us as humans, they have to be where we live as well, because we're just taking up too much area where we live for the areas where we're not living to be sufficient. So the areas where we live have to be doing these things as well. And you're not gonna get anybody excited on Valentine's Day with doom and gloom. I hope there's some wonderful Valentine's Day dates are going on right now, because I just picture one of my first dates with my wife. We went to a talk on bird cognition from the professor of the lab I went to, and that worked out and we got married. So if any of you on like a first date right now to this bee talk, I think you're in for a full life commitment. And now I just made it awkward too, because if you're on a first date and I just said that, it's getting weird now. You're just looking at each other all odd now. So I think getting into the Bee City USA is the efforts of this initiative are part of moving in the right direction. It's saying that, yeah, this is a city, humans live here, but that doesn't mean we have to exclude natural ecosystems from our communities. We can be living in conjunction with all of this. So what can you do? We can increase the availability of native flowering species. These are the plants that these bees and these really, like the butterflies and moths, especially at the larval stage, maybe not so much as the adults, they co-evolved with. And so I didn't really get very much into that, but the hungry caterpillar maybe has taught us a poor thing as a kids, because that hungry caterpillar ate everything. I have young kids, so you may not remember, but in that book, he's eating apples, he's eating pumpkin pies and lollipops and stuff like this. In reality, caterpillars don't do this. They really have a group of plants, or maybe one species or one genus of plants that they eat, and they don't eat pumpkin pies and they don't eat even other plants. They only eat these particular plants. And so if you don't have those plants around, the butterflies and moths won't be around as pollinators as well. And so whereas the bees are probably more specialized to that flower, the butterflies and moths are more specialized at the caterpillar stage. Got to have appropriate spots for nesting. So sometimes that means bare open ground that you're not over compacting or over tilling. Sometimes it means leaving stems up over the winter of plants for the bees to nest in the cavities of the stems. Finding a way to reduce pesticide use. sorry for crushing Hungry Caterpillar. Yeah, I'm gonna leave like the ban Hungry Caterpillar commission. That's gonna make me really popular. I think they're beautiful books that get people to love caterpillars, which I think is an important thing. Because if we can do things like support native insects that could reduce pests by eating them. So like if we can support more predator insects and more parasitoids, so wasps that like to eat some of our pests or use them, that do some beautiful things like paralyze these things and lay their eggs inside of them and carry them back, and then the eggs hatch out of them while they're still alive, or maybe they do that in situ or something. That we do those and reduce some of our pesticides, this can really help as well. And of course, spreading the word, and you all are here, so you can go parrot some of the things I said going forward. And I like to look at this map of all of these cities and how cities are becoming a really predominant part of the US landscape. And this doesn't have to be a bad thing, because what if all of these cities were bee cities? And all of these cities had an environmental focus. Think of just the psychology of living in these places. I don't know if you've seen some of the images of like Singapore, where they have these skylines, or all of these buildings are just built in forests around the buildings, and the treetop canopies around the cities. Just imagine the sense of purpose and place if you're living in a community like that, where you feel like you're living in your ancestral home that we humans came from. It feels like you're living amongst life. These are the current bee cities and bee campuses. The blues are the bee cities. The yellows are the bee campuses. You can see there's a real paucity in this center of the country here, and we have no bee cities in Nebraska. There's one bee campus in Grand Island, but really, I mean, as we sit over here, we're really kind of vacant. So this could be a great opportunity for not just starting something in Bellevue, but emphasizing how Bellevue has been working intentionally to be one of those cities. Like, we're talking about one of those cities where the environment is intertwined with human life. I think this might be a good spot to do a giveaway here. I think my classes would go better if I gave away prizes like a third of the way through it too. I need to start doing this because everyone's like paying attention. I think I've got a good feeling at least. Should we do like one at a time, just like keep let's do prize one. So this is a copy of the book Attracting Native Pollinators, which I have. It's a good book, and that goes to Chandler Cochran. I don't know if Chandler is here or if anyone knows Chandler. I think their lack of attendance does not preclude them from this prize, as far as I know. It does preclude them from my good graces, though. So Chandler, if you're not here, shame on you. Let's do a second one too, just because we're going and everything. So prize 2 is a copy of the book Gardening for Butterflies, which is a really cool one because it's specifically talking about host plants and the importance of the whole life cycle of butterflies. The winner of that is Roy Jaycox. So if Roy is around, and if any of you know Roy, call him up. Tell Roy he's a winner. Make his day. We'll announce the others here in a couple seconds. Okay, so I think people were asking this kind of towards the beginning, of what are some of the commitments for being a bee city. So what really are we doing to be part of Bee City? And I like to kind of break it into these two chunks of the action commitment and then the education commitment. So the action commitment is, I think it's more, and this is kind of what I've been telling people, it's more of declaring that this is something that we're going to be thinking about than a set of overarching rules that we have to obey. And so the first part of this is really work with the city to develop a comprehensive plan. So what this is a collaboration between Green Bellevue and the city of Bellevue to basically make a plan. So this isn't necessarily saying that we have the components of that plan or the particulars of that plan lined out, but we're going to agree upon having the plan. So what this really is a plan to increase habitat and reduce pesticide use in not only the public spaces, but the private spaces as well. And so this doesn't mean, I mean, the point of this is not putting on these like overarching rules and ordinances for the city that are, it's really more of like, of all the things that the city is thinking about, there's a lot of things that we have to do in Bellevue. Let's have this be another thing that we're thinking about. So an important thing, of course, but I know there's many things that the city has to balance. So it's not that this is, you know, superseding any of the other parts of the city plan. It's just part of the city plan. And so working with the city to make sure we're thinking about where are the best spots to integrate native habitat and reduce pesticide use. And then developing a plan specifically for what's called integrative pest management. So the idea of reducing pesticide use and instead relying on beneficial insects that we're supporting through more native habitat as the means for reducing pests. So by supporting those insects, we're then reducing our pests. And then the education component is signage along with the habitat garden. So basically advertise what we're trying to do here. I think this really helps to make people realize this isn't an area of neglect. This is an area of purpose, and it's purposefully rich in diversity, and it's purposefully full of life. And it doesn't mean unmaintained. It means maintained perhaps differently than you have come to expect what maintenance is. And part of this is in that plan of, part of this is working with people who are doing some of the park maintenance to, instead of the maintenance doing maybe like mowing and, you know, like spraying for herbicides broadly, they might be instead trained to do specific invasive species removal and then maybe seasonal maintenance. So it's not that these areas are without maintenance, and maybe that's probably, I would say, one of the reasons why some of these habitat areas fail is that they're often considered as, well, we can put this in and now it's a no maintenance area. But instead, we want to be thinking about this as these are areas that are going to be actively maintained just in a different way. And then Green Bellevue already is putting on annual pollinator education events, and we have plans to do more. So this is part of what we've been doing. And so this is the idea of kind of getting the system out comes from having a Bee City committee that's helping develop this plan, working with the city. And so the goal of this Bee City committee is to have some city staff, some local experts, some enthusiastic, engaged citizens, which I would probably put myself more in that than local expert for this field. And some Parks and Rec staff, some people are involved in this. We've already got at least the startings of the committee put together, but if you want to join the committee, if you're enthusiastic about this, send me an email. I'll share some of my contact information a little bit later, and we can get in touch. So one of those is creating and enhancing pollinator habitat on public-private land. This is an example of a bigger chunk. This was a hillside that was mostly invasive species. Everything got basically killed off here. And this is a lot of back and forth on, what ended up happening. It ended up getting kind of graded, and we put these limestone in, and then all of these plants here were planted, and we had a lot of community help here. And whenever we took pictures, there was like 3 people, because whenever we actually had people that were there to help, nobody was taking pictures. But we do have a few people here. And so this whole hillside got planted with, I think it was like 7,000 plugs over the course of a few weeks. And this is what it looked like really that first growing season. And so, and we're kind of working to keep maintaining that. But this is kind of what you would expect for a meadow like this. It's just a little bit different than a really tightly designed smaller garden, but the size kind of changes how you are going to go about designing it. I will say that this in our survey seemed to be the most popular thing. And I always say, when I'm trying to get people on board with increasing native habitat in their yards, it is a lot more fun to help the environment by adding something than taking something away. So, it's a lot more fun to help the environment by adding native plants to your yard as opposed to like not driving, and because it's hard to keep taking away, and a lot of ways to help the environment or to take away. So I think it's just a lot more fun to add than to take away. And so I think that's a reason here that most people said that they wanted to do that. So apparently the other 2 prize winners are not on the call either, but I'll announce them just in case you're curious and you know them and you want to call them up or something. So prize 3 is a copy of the book Farming for Native Beneficial Insects, which I actually have right here next to me. And that's Joe Lecce. And the last one is Attracting Native Pollinators, and the winner is Christina Miles. One of the things that we are going to do with the cooperation of Bee City is have a recommended native plant list. We have this right here is what the Northern Plains recommended native plant list through Xerces is, which covers our region. But I think part of the Bee City USA is to have a section for Bee City USA on the city website. And I think we could make this a little bit more specialized to our area in particular. So I think this is a good list. And as I'm looking through this really closely, I think basically all of these are native to our area, sans maybe a couple. But I think we could maybe expand this to even put some subcategories depending on your conditions, and in that website that's going to be an informative thing. Part of it is going to make it, we want to make it easy for people to find the plants that are going to be the most beneficial. Managing the property that you're owning or in public properties, for pollinators is another really important thing to help out. So you may have seen, depending on the people who you are acquainted with on social media, you may have seen a lot of the Leave the Leaves campaigns, which is this idea that instead of taking all of your leaves and bagging them up and then hauling them away off your property to as trash or something, just leaving them on your property, because so a lot of insects are overwintering in this leaf litter. There are butterfly and moth species that lay their eggs on these leaves in order for them to hatch, and then they eat the partially decayed leaves in the springtime. They are places where insects pupate, and so the pupa is actually on these leaves if they came from a tree that the insects are eating, they pupate on the tree, leaves fall, and then they overwinter in that leaf litter, and then they hatch the next spring. So every time you haul all those leaves off your property, or you mulch them all up, or you chop them all up, you get rid of all the life that's in there. Not to mention, those leaves are a really important spot for a nice little warm pocket for things to overwinter. So bumblebees like to go under there and make little nests, and maybe little holes that are left from mice or something underneath that leaf litter, and they can overwinter in all of there. Even things like amphibians are wintering in that leaf litter. And the other thing is to leave your plants up all winter. So there's a gardening convention that, as the weather starts to turn in the fall, you chop everything down to the ground and you clean up the garden. But if you have plants that are supporting insects, then getting rid of all of those plants is reducing a lot of that biomass for support and cover. So this is an example of a lot of hollow-stemmed plant species provide a spot for insects to develop through their larval stages, and a lot of these go over the winter. So here's an example of, these are stems of plants, and these might even be artificially made. But if you leave those stems up over the winter and then don't chop them down until late spring, when bees start hatching, coming out of emergence, and becoming more active, then you're allowing them to survive those wintering times. And also, you might have pupae that are on some of these stems that if you chop them all down and bag them up and take them elsewhere, you might be killing off all of the things that are pupating on the stems over the winter. So integrated pest management is the idea of reducing pesticide use and then trying to think about how you're supporting more beneficial native insects on your property in order to have those take care of a pest problem. So we have a question of, when is it okay time to clean up? March, April? I think the rule that I have seen around here is if you get several consecutive days of in the 50s in a row. So it kind of depends on the temperature. And what we do here is, well, for one, you don't have to ever chop anything down. So you can just leave it up. It's perfectly fine. Nobody's going to get you. If there's some aesthetic reason where you want to chop it down, or if you have multiple years of thatch kind of building up or something, you feel the need to clear that out, I would wait until you see sweat bees flying around. So applying grub control to lawns. So I would say when you do that, you're killing all of the insects that are ground nesting and ground larval nesting, depending on how specialized the insecticide is. So, and how much that insecticide is running off. So, it's not great. So I would try to avoid it if possible. And yeah, a question about allelopathic trees and leaf litter. Yeah, so if it's a problem, so if you have plants growing underneath those trees that can't handle them, you can gently move them to a place of your yard. So, and that's not a problem. And that even might be the case if you live in a neighborhood where they're not big fans of allowing leaves to accumulate in your gardens. You could scoop up all your leaves and gently take them to a wheelbarrow and just put them in a corner of your yard and treat it almost like a compost pile. We do that a little bit with our oaks, because we have oaks on here too, and they can pile by the end of winter. It's just like 3 feet thick of leaves, and so we kind of push them to the areas where we're okay with having them. You just want to do it somewhat gently so you're not blowing everything up. But I would say for things like grubs, try to support more insects on your property that would be taking care of those and eating those. So For one, parasitoid wasps are often targeting ground nesting beetles. But if you're talking about things like Japanese beetles, some good predators, insect predators, if you can have a lot of support in the area, they can take these out. So we have assassin bugs that are pretty abundant in our yard. They just started to be like this year after about 4 years of increasing the habitat space, and those assassin bugs will stab right through the carapace of a Japanese beetle and they'll kill them. So as an adult. And the other thing is a lot of these ground nesting grubs, which are like beetle larvae, they really prefer lawn. So a great way to reduce them is to have less lawn. And that may not be the exact comment you would want to hear, but if you get that lawn to just being small necessary areas, there's just not going to be that much space to support them. They do not do very well in deep rooted plants. So they really like chewing on lawns, well, especially these invasive ones. So this is an example of and some of the special insect people, the Xerces people, definitely might have some better suggestions for you than me. That's certainly outside my expertise. This is the rain garden that's on around like 38th and I don't know, just south of Cornhusker, by that Beardmore, and there's a Culver's right over here, kind of along that walk in Bellevue. So this is, we had a group out a few times this fall going in through here and trying to clean it up and take invasive species out. So we're trying to create more places in our city and our county that have a lot of insect support like this area. And this is actually a multifunctional area right here because it's filtering rainwater at the same time. And it's supporting a lot of insects, supporting a lot of birds. This is a picture of my backyard last summer. So even in really small patches, you can have these very thick, multiple species of native flowers going on at one time, supporting a lot of species. Pollinator awareness events. Even this year in COVID, we had a lot of people who were going out like in the farmer's market and to help people who were giving away plants. This is she is showing these kids, there's a little katydid on this stick here. So, the more we can get people to think insects are cool and not be scared of them, the more people are going to be fighting for them, right? And be wanting to see them around. And really, it's part of what makes life more interesting, all of these little things that are all around us. And then we want to be publicly acknowledging Bee City with some of our signage. We have some informative signage that is out right now, but it's not publicly talking about Bee City. And that's one of the things that we would want to be doing too, is acknowledging our membership in this. And then we annually apply for renewal. And we talk about the previous year's activities in that reapplication. So I think part of this is an incentive to just keep working on things. So it's kind of without that membership, it's a little hard to keep always trying to be working on something. You need a little bit of that guidance. It's kind of like having a gym buddy, that it's like you're going to the gym together, and if everyone's kind of has that pact to go to the gym on Thursdays, you can't back out because we're all in it together. But if it's just like, hey, it's me, I'm going to go running to work out or something, it's a little bit harder to do without this kind of formal commitment. So I think that's the benefit of the Bee City. There's an initial application and annual renew fees. So this is based on population size. So this is where Bellevue fits in this. And this is covered by Green Bellevue. So it's not a city thing. So it's $400. We've already, I think we've maybe put this in. yeah, so if you are interested in joining the Bee City USA committee, send me an email, tyler.moore@bellevue.edu, or you can send to my Green Bellevue email, which is tylerm@greenbellevue.org. Yeah. And I've been kind of talking about the benefits of affiliation for a while here, but I think just having this infrastructure built around kind of gives everyone something to be working towards. We're thinking about how we can be supporting pollinators, how could we be supporting native insects. Another way of, well, we've got this on our mind when we're thinking about city planning. And I also think there's the benefit of just being the first in Nebraska to do this, getting a little bit of credit for Bellevue for a lot of people working on creating habitat, reducing pesticide. This has been the case for people who've been, working to make Bellevue a Tree City USA. And so I think it's just making Bellevue a more desirable place for new companies to come that really care about an environmentally friendly city, and new employees to come work. And then just think about, having a city that's almost like if all of the medians are, the rights of way and the parks are filled with habitat and they're filled with life and all of these little creatures, coming into Bellevue could be like, it's like going to the zoo, and you're walking around and you're looking with your family and you're all of these little creatures around. And in the meantime, you're going to shops and you're going to local restaurants. So I think there's an economic boost to the area too, just by having this thing that you're recruiting people to. So if you're ready to act, which I hope you are, or you've probably already been acting, these are, I really like books where they're all over our house. And my wife is always, I got stacks of books. These are a few of the ones that I would recommend. Some of these are Xerces books. Some of these are like more landscape design books for like native plant landscaping. Some of these are more of the why or the ethical part of using more native plants. And that would be things like a New Garden Ethic or like the Bringing Nature Home. This is Benjamin Bode is actually in Lincoln, Nebraska. So he's one of our locals. And some of these are more practical. So like the Heather Holmes books. And then I think this is a great website if you're not aware of it. So this is the National Wildlife Federation. And you can go to the Native Plant Finder. If you go to it and you put your zip code in, anywhere in the country, it'll tell you the top, what we call the keystone native plants. So these are the ones that support the most caterpillar species. So remember I was saying that these caterpillars are not eating all their apple pies and all this stuff. They specialize really on these specific groups of native plants. And so if you're looking to add plants to your landscape or you want to add habitat, you can go into this website, you can add your zip code, and it's going to give you all of the plants that you can organize it by trees or grasses and forbs. And it's going to tell you the plants that are going to support the most. You can look up particular plants and see how many caterpillar species they support in your area. Yeah, so we had another plug for Talame's newer book, which is also a really good one. You run out of space on my slide here, but so you could replace some of your lawn with native plant gardens. This is a really beneficial thing to do, and I would say make sure that you're getting native plants if that's your intentions, because a lot of nurseries are not necessarily selling native plants. So make sure you're going with a nursery that's, I think, either specializing in native plants or you specifically are looking information about the plants that you were interested in. So we've done a lot of stuff with Green Bellevue with Midwest Natives out of Lincoln. And so everything that they grow is a native plant. So if you are looking for a native plant, you can go there and everything is grown locally and for this particular ecoregion. If you're somewhere else in the country, the best bet is find the local native plant nursery. And if not, look at one of the regional native plant nurseries like Prairie Moon Nursery or Prairie Nursery that ship. Stop using insecticides, fungicides, which are also very toxic to insects, especially bees, and really herbicides as well. And I'm not like really crazy adamant about this. I think in a lot of circumstances, herbicides can be a great tool for getting rid of invasive species. But what I'm talking about is like using Roundup to get dandelions out of the cracks in your sidewalk. So this is not the proper use of an herbicide. But if you have a really bad invasive species that if you can kill that and make a lot of room for a native plant, it's going to support a lot more insects. I think that's an appropriate targeted use of an herbicide. And then leave your plants up over winter, allow some spots for overwintering in your yard. And if you want to learn more, I put up a few websites here that might be valuable. So we've got the Bee City USA website. Whoop, ran away from it. Bee City USA website. We've got the Green Bellevue website, and then the Bellevue Native Plant Society website, which is a new one. And if you want to look the Bellevue Native Plant Society up on Facebook, this has just started in the last year, but it's a group of people that are interested in helping people find native plants and get them installed in their yards, and kind of some tips and about growing and gardening and all of these things. And I know I did a lot of talking there. If anyone has any more questions, either for me or if Jennifer is still on, or I don't know if Katie was going to be on, but yeah.
Tyler, where did Bellevue University get all those plugs for that native planting?
Yeah, so we we had a grant, and part of the grant's stipulation was that we had a professional that was helping with the design and the installation and stuff if we put in over a certain number. So we had Ben Vogt of Monarch Gardens in Lincoln, and so he got them through wholesale, and I think he got them from a nursery in Kansas, I think.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so they're from a wholesale Kansas nursery, I think.
All right, Carrie had her hand raised. Carrie, do you want to unmute yourself and ask your question, please?
Hi, thanks. I'm not a member of the committee, but I will go to your website and join up. So I don't know who's looking at what, but I'm very concerned about the educating the public part. I only caught just like glimpses or whispers about something that happened at the grass that was planted in front of the UNMC Bellevue that was beautiful. And then apparently it was taken down because there were complaints about it. And I just think it's going to be so important for people to understand what these, to my eyes, beautiful plantings around the city would be, and not have people who think that a groomed bluegrass lawn is their definition of beautiful, look at it and start denigrating the process.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a challenge, but also I will say, it will come to the defense of some of the complainers at times too, because when I hear about some of these areas that people have complained about in terms of aesthetics, it's because often those areas were kind of poorly designed. So I don't know who was in charge of that particular area, but what I see in some of these problem spots is they'll put an area in that has one or two really aggressive species, so that what happens over the course of maybe 4, 5, 6 years is it becomes a monoculture. And in the time of year when that monoculture plant is blooming, it looks nice, but otherwise it looks like a giant weed patch. I think a couple of those have been where some native sunflowers have been a problem, I think, in some of these plantings. So they've put in a native sunflower, and then what happens in 6 years is it becomes a monoculture of the native sunflower. So like Maximilian sunflower, and it's just, so I think you have to be a little careful in the design of these in order to make it something so it's a little bit more stable in terms of ecological succession over time. And then you have to realize that it's going to take a little bit of maintenance too. But a turf grass lawn takes weekly mowing. And so if you think of these areas, instead of weekly mowing, you want to maybe do a seasonal culling, you know, of if there's a species that's getting too dominant, knock that species back a little bit. Or if there's invasives that are coming in, get rid of those. And so I think you can maintain a design look that is just like a garden anywhere. It's just, it's a garden using particular species that are beneficial. But yeah, and I think part of that's in education, part of that is in execution of these areas.
Thanks.
Yeah. So somebody, Steve asked about work with Bellevue University to become a Bee City campus in addition to the city. And I think that's a great idea as somebody who's on the inside there. Yeah, we should definitely work on that. In some respects, it's a little bit easier to get a whole city behind something than one campus, but I think we've got a shot. Yeah, but so we've already been working with maintenance people to like the one side of campus, having it kind of be a pesticide-free campus, and we're growing a lot of our plants now on site at the greenhouse. So we're going to be trying to, as some of the things are dying off, replacing them with more beneficial species and using less ornamental annuals and instead putting in native perennials in spots. So yeah, we're kind of moving in that direction.
So Tyler, maybe you touched on this and I missed it, but is there anything that we need to be doing as individuals to help support the city make what we feel is the right decision here?
Well, I don't know if that's not my expertise. Dawn may be able to speak to that a little bit more than me. From everything I'm gathering right now, I think the city is very behind everything. They just they want to make sure that they're doing the right thing. So, and actually, I was in all of the talk that we've had so far, it's really been more of, it's not resistance, it's more of they want to make sure that there's not extra things that they could be doing better before we move forward. So it was actually maybe a little bit more care in the other direction from the people that I had been talking to. But yeah, I don't think there's anything, right? Your Congress people, your city council people, I don't know, that I think we're not necessarily at that yet.
And you invited me in, Tyler, so
Yeah, go for it.
I'll step in as the government representative here, being on the council. You adequately and appropriately identified that the city is wanting to take it seriously and look at what does that mean if we do it? What are we committing to? What do we need to do? Rather than just doing it and then getting into it and deciding, oh, this isn't for us, and not doing it. So the city staff, the Parks Department are taking it seriously. And the question that Jillian asked, what can we do? I think it is an ongoing education, and we do need to help both the staff and the mayor and the council to understand the value to the city. And you pointed out some of the economic value, some of the tourist value. I think now that the latest reauthorization for the military budget requires that all military bases have to become pollinator friendly, that's a big one. And if we are going to partner with Offutt on so many other things, we need to remind our elected officials and the chamber and others that being pollinator friendly on the base means the city needs to set the same example. And that could even help us with future military installations that go out for bid and that Offutt will try and do. So each of us, wherever we have the opportunity to share information with city and county and state officials is helpful. So continue to spread the word wherever you can.
Thank you both.
All right, if there aren't any other questions for Tyler, are there any other announcements from Green Bellevue board members that I missed?
Michelle, I would just ask, maybe as we finish and any other announcements, as the trailer on the recording, you might just mention some of those things that didn't get recorded on the front end. So if somebody does tune in later, and we fortunately do get a lot of people that look at these at a later time, so that way they will have those updates of activities coming up, like our Earth Day activities and next month's meeting.
Good point. Thanks, Don. So quick recap of the updates. The Green Bellevue board has been working on Bee City USA, Sarpy County Earth Day, which is a hybrid event this year. I don't know if we caught Brittany's explanation of the passport program, but we will be doing some in-person events throughout the months, the end of April through the beginning of May, as well as some online learning activities and our passport exhibition program. Check out our website for more information. We've been looking at the language in our bylaws. Next month, our meeting will be about waste management updates for the Bellevue area, as well as the membership language in our bylaws. New website, we're in progress with that, and you can still access our old website still at greenbellevue.org. And we approved our 2021 budget this weekend. We have also reformed committees and are solidifying our purpose statements and what we will be doing. So in addition to our typical executive committee and finance committee, we've renamed our marketing and communications committee to digital connections. We have a community connections committee where we are keeping track of all of our partners that Green Bellevue works with. We have the membership committee. We have our programs committee, natural resources, and our, I don't remember the actual name of it, but it's pretty much our green plantings. We have other things going on as well. So stay tuned to social media and our website. Also, we are not done with Pollinators and Bee City USA. So stay tuned for more updates on that through social media and website. And there may be more opportunities for prizes coming up. So stick with us, grow with us, and let's work together to make Bellevue a greener place. So if you have any questions, feel free to contact any one of us. You have Tyler's information. All of the board members are first name, first last initial at greenbellevue.org. So we really appreciate you spending your Sunday afternoon with us, hanging out, listening to Tyler's awesome presentation on not just Bee City USA, but how to help all native insects and native plants which has a cascading effect that'll improve our soil. It'll improve our wastewater runoff. It'll improve all plants and animals in the area to have that native foundation. So thank you, Tyler, for all the work you've put into this. Thank you, Green Bellevue board members, for all of the support. And thank you to all of you who are here today for caring enough to be here and learn about and take action on these important habitat issues. So with that, happy Valentine's Day, everybody, and we'll see you later. Oh, the next meeting is March 14th, same time, same place.
Oh, and lastly, I want to say thank you to the Xerces Society for donating the prizes and for the staff members for coming. We didn't need you, but it was good backup.
And everybody, be my Valentine today.
Thanks, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day.
Love you all.
Ron, I don't